I thought it would be a great exercise to manage some policy that's going to be implemented on Firewall 1 so that our security manager has the ability to reach through that firewall and actually also manage Firewall 2. So here's our game plan. We need to modify the policy that's going to be applied to Firewall 1 so that the security manager from its IP address has the ability to access and connect and work with Firewall 2. And in the process of doing that, we're going to have lots of opportunities for learning, including enabling logging on our rules so we can find out what the heck's happening if things don't work as expected. So that we can see what's happening, modify the policy, and then get the connectivity that we need. And so once we have the firewall rules in place on Firewall 1, we'll then go ahead and add Firewall 2 as another object, a gateway, that can be managed by our security manager. And before we start the lab, it just occurred to me that there's one other change that we are going to have to implement to make this work, and that is this manager at the moment does not use .111 as a default gateway. So if this manager needed to reach 67.83.0.112, it would be using some other default gateway. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into the web user interface for this management server, and we're going to tell it that its default gateway is 192.168.1.111. And that way, if it needs to reach out to Firewall 2, it will be forwarding traffic in the direction of Firewall 1 to get there. So here we are on client-nug. This is also a hands-on lab, so if you're logged on to cp2nuggets.com, feel free to click the link for a virtual lab and get the hands-on practice as we go through this together. So our first stop is going to be to modify the default route on our management server. So I have a shortcut here on the desktop for the web user interface for the management server. So we'll select that. It's going to take us to https://192.168.1.110. We'll log on as admin, and we'll supply the lab password, and then we'll click Login. Fantastic. Over here on the left-hand side, under Network Management, there's an area for IPv4 static routes. We'll click on that, and it's showing us that the current default route is 192.168.1.1. So we are going to edit that by clicking Edit, and we'll select that route, click on Edit, and we are going to change it to be the IP address of Firewall 1, which is 111, just like that. So with the last octet being .111, we'll click on OK, and click on Save, and now the security management server has a correct default route that it can use to forward packets in the direction of Firewall 2. Alright, so now that that's done, I'm going to go ahead and log out here from the web user interface, and I'm going to close my browser completely. And with that done, we'll hover near the bottom, and there is a shortcut here on the taskbar for Smart Console. So we'll launch Smart Console. I suppose we could also launch it over here on the left. That would work as well. Either way will work fine. And we'll give Smart Console a moment to come up. And we'll log in as admin to our management server at .110, and we'll supply our lab password. And then we'll click Login. So here's our existing policy. So we have two rules in that policy, one for management traffic and one is a cleanup rule. Now, before we create the new rules that's going to allow the management server to have access to Firewall 2, let me show you a really important and helpful step in identifying when your firewall is dropping traffic that you didn't intend. So if there's not traffic that's allowed before the cleanup rule is hit, the cleanup rule says any traffic from any source, any destination, any protocol is going to be dropped. However, if we scroll over to the right even further, it's not being tracked, meaning there's no log files being created for each of those hits. So one thing we can do, if we want to identify what traffic is being dropped, we can go ahead and modify the cleanup rule. So in the track column, we'll hit the drop down arrow, and then we'll select log. And once this is published and implemented, we can have log files that will tell us exactly what traffic is being denied by the firewall by that rule. So we'll go ahead and click on Publish to go ahead and publish it. I'm also going to click on the checkbox that says Don't show this again. Click on Publish, and then when that's done, I'll go ahead and click on Install Policy, followed by another click on Install to confirm, and it is on its way. So we'll give that a moment to complete. Beautiful. That message implies that it was successful. That's great. So now, before we add a rule for the security manager to communicate with Firewall 2, let's go ahead and try it without any explicit permissions that allow that to happen. So let's go back to the tab for Gateways and Servers over here on the left. And let's click on the new icon to add a new gateway. So from the drop down, we'll select Gateway. We'll click on Wizard Mode. We'll call our device Firewall 2. The gateway platform is an open server. as opposed to one of the other flavors, including appliances. And then we'll specify the IPv4 address, which is 67.83.0.112, and click on Next. Now, it's warning us because we already created an object with that same IP address, and by adding a gateway, it's going to automatically create an object for that gateway, and it has the same address. So it's not really a problem, it's just more of a warning. So I'm going to go ahead and say yes, please continue anyway. And now it's asking us for the password so it can initialize the secure internal communications between the security manager and the new gateway. So we'll supply our lab password, and with that supplied, we'll click on Next, and then we'll simply wait and see what happens. It's not going to be too good because the traffic that is being sent from the security manager over to Firewall 2 is not being allowed by Firewall 1 with its current policies. So I suppose we could wait longer for another error message, but it doesn't look like it's going to happen. It's been a few moments. So there we go. Failed to connect to the security gateway. So we'll click on OK. We'll click on Cancel regarding the Add New Gateway wizard. And now let's go back to our security policy and take a look at the logs, which will tell us explicitly what the Firewall 1, was dropping. So if we go back here on the left to Security Policies, and then we click on Rule 2 here, and notice with Rule 2 highlighted, it's telling us in the summary pane down here regarding Rule 2 that it's been hit quite a few times, meaning there's been many packets that have come across Rule 2 and been dropped as a result. But fortunately, because we're also doing logging, we can go ahead and get details on that. So with Rule 2 still highlighted, if we click on Logs and give it just a moment to bring up the logs regarding that rule, there they are. And the newest ones are on top. So if we just grab one of these, so right here, this shows the source is the management server, the destination is Firewall 2. If we double click on that, it'll bring up a separate window with the details for that packet. So the source IP address was this guy, the destination IP address was Firewall 2. It has the ports involved, both the source port and the destination port, and the action was drop. So the cool thing about having the logging going on is that we're aware that the drops are happening at the firewall and it's not something else in the network causing a problem. And then we could get out the documentation and identify, okay, what are all the ports that need to be open between the manager and the firewall that it's managing? Or if it's a more loose policy, we could just say, please allow all traffic, anything in the IP protocol stack, between the management server and Firewall 2. And for this demonstration, I think that's what I would like to do. So I'm going to go ahead and close this log details pane here. And what we're going to do is let's go ahead and add a new rule that allows the management server to have unfettered access via IP to the IP address of Firewall 2. And with Rule 2 selected, we can right click and we can select New Rule and then click Above, meaning above the current rule that we have selected. And that creates a new rule for us in our policy. So let's call this Server to Firewall 2. The source IP address, we'll go ahead and click on the plus symbol. That's going to be our management server. So if we scroll down, here's an entry right here, an object called management server with the IP address ending in .110. So we'll click on plus to add into that column. We'll go ahead and click on close. And then for the destination, it's going to be the IP address of Firewall 2. So we'll click on plus. And from here, we can select the object called FW-2 that we created earlier that has the IP address of 67.83.0.12. So we could just double click on this if that's the only entry we wanted to, or if we had multiple entries, we could use the plus symbol and just continue going. So I'm going to double click here on the FW-2 object. That puts them in the destination field. It also closes that other window. And then regarding the services and applications, I'm going to leave it wide open, meaning anything the security manager wants to ship over to Firewall 2 at that IP address, Firewall 1 is not going to get in the way of that. And then we also need to specify here in the action column that we want it to allow that traffic. And if we wanted to also, check this out, we could also log it. So under tracking, we could use the drop down and select log on that as well. And that way we can look at those logs and see specifically what traffic is being allowed through the firewall between the server and Firewall 2. So with those changes done, we'll click on Publish. And now that it's published, we'll go ahead and apply that policy or install that policy on Firewall 1. So we'll click on Install Policy. We'll click on Install again. And we'll give it a moment just to verify that that policy is successfully implemented over on Firewall 1. And that looks like a great big home run. Fantastic. And now that that's done, let's go back over here on the left to our tab for Gateways and Servers. And now, with Firewall 1 allowing a conversation to happen between the manager and Firewall 2, let's go ahead and click on the icon here for New. And then from the drop-down, we'll select Gateway. We'll click on Wizard Mode. We'll call this guy firewall 2. We'll specify the type of platform he's on, and we'll specify his IP address, which is 67.83.0.112, and click on next. We'll say thanks for the warning that we have two objects with the same IP address. No worries. Click on yes. Now it's asking for the initial password that we can use between the security manager and firewall 2 to set up secure internal communications. We'll supply that. Click on next. And that looks way, way better than the error message that we got earlier when it couldn't communicate successfully. So we'll click on close. And if we don't need to do any further editing of that specific firewall right now, we can simply remove the check out of the checkbox that says edit gateway properties for further configuration. And if we're done, we'll simply click on finish. It's again giving us a warning saying, hey, you got a couple objects with the same IP address. That hasn't changed from earlier, so we'll go ahead and click on yes to keep the changes. And now that we've added that gateway under the umbrella of our security manager, we want to click on publish. And that way other individuals, if they're also working with the same security manager, they'll be able to see that new firewall as well. In this nugget, we've taken the opportunity to play with some security policies to allow our security management server to have access to a new gateway. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.